The entire purpose of the Sith is to pervert the energies of the Force in order to serve themselves. They twist life and bend it to their will, meddling in affairs of the universe that don't concern mortals, and there are no boundaries that they will not cross in their pursuit of power. More than once, the Force itself has had to step in and punish Sith for their hubris. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Force hated the Sith. The dark side of the Force itself has as much a will as the light, and by and large, the Sith were its favorite agents. There did exist a people that the Force, even the dark side, hated so much that it engineered their destruction. They once ruled the ancient galaxy, but their ways were so hideous that the Force abandoned them. We're speaking of the Rakata. Welcome back to the Archives, Lore Junkies. Let us begin. The Rakata are clearly hated more by the Force than the Sith ever were. Thankfully, because of recent mentions in Star Wars canon, many are more aware of the Rakata. But for those who are not as familiar with this unsavory species, allow us to introduce you to them. The Rakata were a reptilian species that long ago served the Celestials alongside species such as the Kwa, the Gree, and the Killiks. Utilizing the Force and the knowledge of the Celestials, they constructed Force-based machines of great and terrifying magnitude. Such machines would include the Starforge, a sentient battle station that could use the Force in conjunction with the energy of stars to create an endless supply of ships and weaponry. They built so much around the galaxy that most races took to calling them simply the Builders. But like the Sith purebloods, the Rakata were a violent people that were naturally and innately drawn to the dark side. According to some speculated history, the reason there is a hyperspace barrier between the known galaxy and what forms the unknown regions is because the Celestials are attempting to keep the Rakata contained. But after the mysterious disappearance of the Celestials long ago, the Rakata returned, having formed what they called the Infinite Empire. This is where things get problematic. The archaic year was around 36,000 BBY. The Rakata saw the galaxy as nothing but a field of harvest for their pleasure, and so they developed technologies that drew upon the Force to serve their whims. Everything from their buildings to their starships and even their weapons were powered by the dark side of the Force. They even developed the very first lightsaber technology, then called Force Sabers because it had no ignition switch, but relied on the dark side to activate it completely. The Rakata also were credited with having been one of the first species to develop hyperspace travel, but their hyperdrives could only lock on and travel to worlds that had a high potency of Force energy. When they found these worlds, they would ruthlessly attack and enslave the population. Because of their advanced weaponry, few, if any, of these worlds in their primitive galaxy could resist them. The only one that we know of that was successful was the Sith of Korriban. Back in this day, they were at the apex of King Adis's reign, this being the man who began the legend of the chosen one of the Sith Ari. The Sith Ari, King Adis, rallied the primitive tribes of the Sith and repelled the Rakata's invasion, stealing their technology along the way. But besides this defeat, the Rakata were forming an empire around the stars and exacting their horrors upon the innocent populations. See, the Rakata are very different from the Sith. They're vile in a way that the Sith are not. They are cannibals and were known to feast upon the flesh of their defeated enemies. This even included members of their own species. Those of a higher caste in the Empire were able to eat anyone beneath them that displeased them. They often had failed underlings cooked up and prepared for feasts. This even extended to their warriors. When the Rakata took over a world, they would take captive the entire population to force them to serve their whims, whether that be building things, being made into dinner, or something else that we'll get into a moment. But when they located those sufficiently strong in the Force, they would have them thrown into a boot camp to be made into what they called Force Hounds. Only the strongest children survived this grueling camp of torture and constant combat. When the children arose, they were elite Force saber-wielding slave warriors that could sniff out planets rich in the Force for the Rakata to invade. Only a single Force Hound could serve a Rakatan leader known as a Praetor, so there is normally a tournament held for the prospective Force Hounds to battle until one man stands. When a duel occurred between two final candidates, the loser was eaten by the Praetor while the winner got to be their personal hound. You may be thinking that there exist cannibals all over the Star Wars mythos, so what makes the Rakata so special and vile? The answer is because they didn't just cannibalize flesh, but they literally cannibalized Force energy. Their machines all run off of the Force, but they have to extract it from somewhere. They don't simply siphon the ambient energy out of the universe, but the populations of slaves that they capture are taken to special ships and facilities where they are strapped into machines. Their force energy is then painfully extracted out of their bodies to fuel their ships. Living beings get turned into batteries, used up, and then tossed away. This is the main sin of the Rakata. Their cycle of waste is the main approach to everything, including to the Force. They did not view the Force as a sacred field of energy. They saw it only as a resource. We can differentiate between their approach and that of the Sith. Yes, the Sith openly state that it is their entire goal to subjugate the Force. They use the dark side and they bend it to their will, making it work for them and give them whatever they want. But it's different, because even the most vile of Sith, at the very least, respects the power for power's sake, which leads them into a roundabout way of respecting the Force. They subjugate it to do their will, because they see it as something to be coveted. They acknowledge both its strength and its will, but they desire to make their will superior to it. In the Darth Plagueis novel, Plagueis speaks to Sidious about the idea of making oneself attractive to the dark side. Committing great acts of evil and surrendering to dark emotions, one captures the attention of the dark side and makes a pact with it. Following this, one can harness its power. In this process, the Sith acknowledges the living energies of the Force and even anthropomorphizes with it, accepting the idea that they are bargaining with a power greater than themselves so that they can then become greater than it. By strict contrast, the Rakata never see the Force as a living thing. They don't know or care about its will or its currents. They do not concern themselves with bargaining or surrendering to dark emotions. They just take, consume, and bleed it dry. The Force will not be disrespected like this for long, and it will balance itself. And this harsh balance came in the year 25,200 BBY. By now, the Infinite Empire had been driven back from the Tython system by the Jedi, the ancestors of the Jedi. This defeat spurred on the civil war within the Infinite Empire itself, as each Predator turned on one another to form internal factions. However, something very unexpected happened here. The Rakata were struck by a deadly plague of unknown origins. It spread rapidly through their ranks. Millions upon millions of Rakata dropped dead across the stars, and none of their scientists could find a way to stop it or even know why. As their species faced extermination, the Force put a cherry on top by completely abandoning them. The Rakata suddenly and inexplicably began to lose their connection to the Force. This strange mutation stripped the builders of their powers, those that they had used to cannibalize the stars. The Rakata lost their ability to manipulate their own technology, which relied on their Force powers, and soon they had to rely on inferior devices that were not dependent on the Force. Sensing the growing weakness, slave species rebelled in large-scale insurrections across the galaxy, all creating the total collapse of the Infinite Empire. The Rakata fled and left behind their technology, which the worlds of the galaxy repurposed to operate without the usage of the Force, thereby enabling widespread hyperspace travel. But back on their homeworld of Lehon, located right under the Starforge, the Rakata were reduced to barbarity amongst each other. A worldwide civil war erupted, and they devolved from an intelligent builder race into savages. Their infighting amongst themselves brought the remains of their civilization to even further ruin. And after the global war concluded, all that remained were several tribes that dwindled into primitivism. Every now and then, some warlord would attempt to rise up and unite the tribes under his own banner and rule, only for the sub-tribes to revolt, causing yet even more devastation. This cycle repeated on a loop until there was nothing left of the Rakata except for a near bestial savage form, in a single intelligent caste system known as the Elders Tribe. They alone retained the full knowledge of their history and lived in the Temple of the Ancients on Lehon. In time, not even their memory would be left behind. The liberated worlds of the galaxy destroyed their creations and all records of their rulership. Their memory was erased and expunged to spite them, and 20,000 years later, few knew of the ancient builder race. This is what happened when the Force truly hated something. It stripped them of all of their power, all intelligence, and all nobility. It destroyed them down to atoms and wiped them off of the face of existence. Not even the memory of their grand conquest remains. Only a handful of them are left to fester in their own squalor, to be tortured with the knowledge of what they once were. Great purges of Jedi and Sith have happened in history, but there was always a chance for them to come back because of the will of the Force. But the Force had absolutely no will to allow the Rakata to return. And honestly, even if they tried to make a comeback, they would not be especially threatening. They only thrived in a pre-Jedi galaxy over planets that had barely any interstellar capabilities. The Rakata themselves weren't even especially skilled with the Force that they wielded. They could use telekinesis and could conjure Force lightning, but even the Praetors struggled in combat against the Jedi Rangers. They were the equivalent to today's Jedi Knights. The Sith made them look like a joke by comparison to how deeply they dove into the powers and gifts of the dark side. And as we said earlier, that is the fundamental difference. So what do you think about this, my friends? Does this in any way change how you see the Sith's approach to the Force? And would you want to see the Rakata and their downfall featured on screen in a future project one day? The Rakata are such a fascinating addition to the Star Wars mythos because they completely recontextualize the Sith and their relationship with the dark side. Even at their most cruel, the Sith still recognize the Force as something vast, ancient, and worthy of respect. Something to be bargained with or mastered through understanding. The Rakata, though, never saw the Force that way at all. To them, it is nothing more than a resource to be harvested, a tool to be exploited, stripped of meaning or reverence. And that fundamental difference lies the reason why the Force itself ultimately turned against them. The reason they are viewed as something uniquely abhorrent is because they did not merely abuse the Force, they stripped it of its meaning. The Sith, for all of their cruelty, still approach the dark side with a sense of reverence. They believe that it is alive, conscious, and worthy of fear. They submit to it even as they seek to dominate, understand that power must be earned through pain, will, and transformation. The Rakata have no reverence. To them, the Force was not a living presence or a cosmic truth. It is a raw substance to be mined, burned, and discarded. They did not seek its communion or mastery, only its consumption. Where the Sith bowed, even if only in defiance, the Rakata spat. Where the Sith bled for power, the Rakata simply extracted it from others. And in that distinction lies the reason the Force tolerated the Sith, but annihilated the Rakata. One sought to rule the Force, the other sought to reduce it to fuel. So my friends, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on the Rakata and their relationship to the Force, especially when concerning how it's different from that of the Sith? And as always, thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you always.